The data factory is one of the experience within Microsoft Fabric, which in turn comprises of two different features: the data pipelines and the data flows. The data flow Gen 2 more specific. Now, what is data pipeline? So, a data pipeline in Microsoft Fabric is basically the ETL/ELT tool for orchestrating the data movement and transformation tasks across various data sources. So basically, it allows you to build certain workflow in a controlled manner to perform certain set of tasks on your data. Those tasks can be considered as the different activities that are supported within the data pipeline. Now, those who are familiar with Azure Data Factory or data pipelines in Azure Synapse can consider the data pipeline in Microsoft Fabric equivalent to that. So the data pipeline in Microsoft Fabric built on Azure Data Factory's foundation, and it in turn allows or enables scalable low-code ETL, ELT processes within the Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. Now, why low-code? Because I just have to drag and drop certain visual activities, set up some configurations within that, and voila, your end-to-end flow got created without having the need for me to physically code anything. So this is a low-code, no-code methodology of Microsoft to provide with an ETL/ELT tool within Microsoft Fabric ecosystem. Now, activities are classified based on certain categories as to what are they about. Certain activities are to move and transform the data. Certain are to identify the metadata. Then we need a control flow in case of multiple conditional executions or some wait aspect. So for that, we have control flow activities. Then we have orchestrator activities to orchestrate some external events. Then notification, transformations, and machine learning. Now, though I stated that the data pipeline is built on the Azure Data Factory's foundation, 90% of the activities that you all see are exact replica of the activities that are present in Azure Data Factory. But there are some additional activities that are present in the Fabric data pipeline that are yet not available in the Azure Data Factory or the Synapse data pipelines. Those are semantic model refresh. Now, if you'll remember, semantic model is the underlying source or the model of your Power BI reports that you create. So semantic model refresh is basically an activity to trigger the refresh of your Power BI reports or your semantic models. Then these two notification activities, these are not available in Azure Data Factory or the Synapse data pipelines, but are available in the Fabric data pipeline itself. And there are some additional features and functionalities across other activities that are present here and differ from the Azure Data Factory. Now, those who are new to the data pipeline need not worry about the statements that I provided. But those who are already aware with respect to Azure Data Factory, for them, this is like an additional understanding of how these two ecosystems differ. And this is just one of the tip of the difference. There are other differences as well that I'll eventually cover as and when we move along. But do remember, for those who are new to this, you all can ignore certain aspects of the comparison if need be. Now, as I stated, correct, data pipeline is basically orchestrating a data movement and transformation tasks. Task meaning equivalent to the activities across various data sources in a controlled flow using activities via a proper data flow in a proper control flow mechanism. So now let's take a look now let's understand certain activities. Or before going into activities, let's understand the overall ecosystem of data pipeline before we move across. So now let's consider that I want to copy the data from a source to a destination. I won't go into the detail of this as of today. This copy data activity is the most critical activity within the data pipeline that we would cover eventually. But before we go deep dive into this activity, let's understand the other framework within the data pipeline, which would help us understand copy data activity much more easier. So now let's understand the case scenario a bit. So for me, there is a need to copy the data from one source, from a source into a sink. Sink meaning destination wherein I want to dump my data. So I have to copy the data from one location and dump it into some another location. So in that case, I would use a copy activity. As the name suggests, it allows me to copy from us. I have to provide a source from where I want to extract the data and the destination or sink where I want to dump the data. So now let's consider that I have to copy the data into some destination. Now, if you all remember, let's take an example that I want to copy the data from somewhere into my Lakehouse table. And then I want to use a SQL Analytics endpoint within my Power BI report. So post that I want to refresh the Power BI. Once I copy the data, then I want to refresh the Power BI report. Now, if you see the activities that are displayed here are just a subset of activities that are present here. This list, this ellipsis contains all the activities that are present here as the ellipsis suggests. All activities. But some of the main meaning frequently used activities are present here, like the semantic model refresh. This I can also search from here by typing, or I can directly pull it from here. So now, in case if you'll understand the use case, I want to copy the data into a Lakehouse table and then refresh the Power BI. So now I have to create a dependency between these two, because as of now, these two are in silos. Correct? Now, in case if these two are in silos, it means when I execute this pipeline, both of them would be executed parallelly. So if both of them are getting executed parallelly, that would be a problem, correct? Because what would happen is my data is getting copied and parallel my data is getting refreshed. So it would lead to, I'm not sure whether the data has been updated already or it is yet to be updated, and my report is getting refreshed. So my requirement is once the copy activity gets completed, then and then only I need to refresh the semantic model. Meaning I want it to be sequential in this scenario. So depending upon your use cases, you can either have a sequential flow or a parallel flow or a combination of sequential, parallel, etc. This is what we mean by having a controlled flow of your activities or tasks within the data pipeline. So in that case, if I want it to be sequential, I want to create a dependency of this task on this task. You all agree? Correct. Until and unless I add a dependency of task on this task, it would work independently. So data pipeline or Azure Data Factory or data pipelines in Synapse supports 4 types of dependencies between the activities that can be used to control the execution flow of connected activities within the same pipeline. a pretty big statement I made, correct? That data factory supports 4 types of dependencies. Can you see 4 different symbols at the end of this activity? A gray, green, red, and blue. So data factory supports 4 types of dependencies between the activities that in turn can be used by me to control the execution flow of connected activities within the same pipeline. Now, what are the 4 dependencies? 4 dependencies are: first is on skip, second is on success, third is on failure, and fourth is on completion. Now, what does these 4 dependencies mean? Let's take. So for now, let me go across some another activity. So what the wait activity does is, it allows you to wait for some time before moving to the next corresponding activity. So in that, under the settings, I can provide how much time do I need to wait in seconds. Imagine that if I want to wait for 5 minutes, I'll put 300. And I can, let's ignore this dynamic content for now, which will eventually cover across. So the wait aspect is to wait for certain time before moving to the next activity. Now, would there be a reason for anyone to wait for some time before moving to the next activity? Let's take our use case only, the earlier use case. Imagine that the earlier use case, I want to refresh the Power BI report once I load the data into the Lakehouse table. And in the Power BI report, I'm using the SQL Analytics endpoint view. Correct? Now, I want to create a dependency between these two, because post the copy activity only, I want to refresh the report. So in that case, out of the 4 dependency, I want, once the copy activity is successfully completed, then I want to refresh the Power BI report. So then what I'll do is I'll add on success dependency. So I just have to drag this to the next activity. This in turn would create a dependency between these 2 activities, and this activity would only be refreshed, or sorry, would only be executed if and only if this activity is a success, because I have added on success dependency. Now, let's go back to our use case. I want to refresh the Power BI model that uses the view of the SQL Analytics endpoint of the Lakehouse, and the Lakehouse in which I'm updating the table and overriding the table. And if you'll remember, one of the limitations of the SQL Analytics endpoint is, even if the data gets loaded within the Lakehouse table, the SQL Analytics endpoint, there is some delay or lag in the SQL Analytics endpoint getting refreshed with the latest data. So can I directly instantly go and refresh my Power BI report once my data is copied into my Lakehouse table? Unfortunately, no. Correct. Why? Because I do not know whether the SQL Analytics endpoint has been refreshed or not. So for that, one of the case study that I had provided, rather than case study, I told you all to think across on how to handle that. That would get added as a case study for the coming weekend once we complete the data pipeline aspect. But temporarily, what I can do is, rather than directly doing it, what I can do is I can add a wait activity, because I know that I need to wait for some time. Unfortunately, there is no fixed time that I can wait. Correct. It can be 1 minute, it can be 2 minutes. Correct. But for this use case, just to explain you all the significance of that wait activity and the dependency, I'll say that, let's say that Microsoft states that, and this is just an assumption, correct? Let's just assume that Microsoft states that depending on whatever amount of data you are loading into the lakehouse, the maximum delay between the SQL Analytics endpoint and the lakehouse might be 5 minutes. Remember, this is not an actual statement. This is just an assumption that I'm taking for this. Correct? Nowhere has Microsoft stated anything with respect to the delay. This is just an assumption for me for this particular use case. I hope you all won't confuse this. So the lag as per our assumption of Microsoft documentation is it can be anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes. So in that case, what I can do is I can add a wait time of 300 seconds, the maximum peak. That is by default, after 5 minutes, the data would get updated. So then what I'll do is once the data is copied successfully, then I'll wait for 5 minutes. Once I wait for 5 minutes, then on success of this, I'll refresh the semantic model. This is the significance of wait activity. That in case if you want to wait for some time before moving to the next activity, you can use the wait aspect. But I hope you all understood the concept of dependencies and the controlled flow of your activities is what the data pipeline is. Now, what does other dependency type signify here? We'll cover in subsequent time. But I hope this case study is clear as to why I had to introduce the wait. So this is how you orchestrate your data flow with these set of activities. Now, let's understand other dependencies. So now, let's say that I have a wait act. I have two activities. Okay. Now, before we proceed on the dependencies, there are two additional aspects that are critical in the data pipeline. One is, you all can see here, correct, something called as parameter, and another is something called as variables. Now, what does this parameter and variable signify? Because we would be using this to understand the different dependencies eventually. Now, parameters and variables, those who have worked across in any coding aspect, be it SQL, PowerShell, Python, is the same terminology that we use across. We have something called as parameter or a variable within SQL. So can someone state me, in your understanding, what can the parameter or variable be in the concept of the data pipeline? Remember, as I stated, correct, Microsoft uses 90% the similar terminologies, which are self-explanatory. So according to you all, what might be the concept of parameter variables within the data pipeline?
Parameter may be the connection string.
No, it is not. See, connection is another aspect, correct? So for parameter, see, what if I just want to execute a wait activity here? Correct? Does wait have any connection to any source or destination? No, correct? But parameters and variables are at a pipeline level. Any other guesses? Let's keep this interactive, correct? Else it would be very monotonous.
Parameters might be values that you want to give to the pipeline to perform an action, like anything, say for instance, maybe like you said, wait activity. So you want to say 5 seconds or 10 seconds, what is the wait activity? So that might be one of the parameters. Anything or any logic or any value, something like that. You're on mute, Nandan.
So then what is variable?
Variable is what I'm saying probably. Actually, parameter, the difference between parameter and variable will be that parameter would be something that you're getting from the external world, and variable might be something which is you can save it from within the pipeline also. That's my understanding.
Correct. So I'll say it's partially correct. So both parameters and variables are at a pipeline level, but parameters are defined at the pipeline level and cannot be modified during a pipeline run. So parameters can be passed while executing the pipeline, but once the pipeline is under execution, I cannot update or modify the parameter. So in some aspect, someone stated that parameter is like an external value that you are passing. So that's correct. When I say external value, it means it is while executing the pipeline, I am passing some value, and once the pipeline is executed, it cannot be updated. Whereas pipeline variables are the values that can be set and modified during a pipeline run. So then what is the use of pipeline variables? So pipeline variables can be used to store and manipulate the data during a pipeline run. So I'll reiterate again. Parameters are defined at the pipeline level and cannot be modified during a pipeline run. But pipeline variables are the values that can be set and modified during a pipeline run. And it's because pipeline variables can be used to store and manipulate the data during the pipeline run. Now let's understand that practically. So now, first aspect is, let me define some parameters. So let me define a parameter called param1. Now, in whichever, so those who are familiar with SQL, you might have created stored procedures. In procedures, you have parameters that you can pass, correct? So
Yes.
consider that parameter equivalent to this parameter, wherein while executing the stored procedure, you will pass the value to the parameter. But once the stored procedure is executed, can you update the parameter value? No, correct. So parameters are the values that you can pass while execution, but cannot be modified during the execution. Now, parameters are like input values that I am providing for something within my pipeline before the pipeline begins its execution. Now that input value might differ based on the data type. Hence, there are different types of different data types for the parameters. You have string, integer, float, boolean, array, object, and secure string. So I'll come to secure string eventually, because as the name suggests, secure string, it is more on the managing your parameter value much more securely. We'll take a look eventually on that. But now let's start with beginning aspect. So now let me take type integer as my parameter value. Now you all can see there's something called as a default value. Those who are familiar with stored procedures, when you create a parameter, you can also define a default value. Now, what does the default value mean? As I said, I can modify the value of the parameter before executing the pipeline. So imagine that if I do not pass any value to this parameter while executing, then I can state that if no parameters are passed while executing the pipeline, take this as the default value for that parameter throughout the pipeline run. So in this case, I'll take it as 3. And I can define n number of parameters. I can define multiple parameters. So I define it as type string and ABC. Now, of course, I can even delete it. If I click here, I can then correspondingly go and delete the parameters if there is no need. Then let's declare variables. Variables are something that can be modified or set during the pipeline run. So now let me define a variable called variable1. Now, similar to parameter, variable also has its own set of data types. But the variable types are somewhat limited. You have string, boolean, array, and integer. So in this case, let me take it as an integer itself. And similar to how you can define a default value for parameter, I can define a default value here as well. I'll keep it as 0. Similarly, I'll define another variable. And the value is, let's say, I keep it as string and value as XYZ. Now, can you see when I wrote variable1, this variable name already exists. But in case if I use uppercase, it considered it's a different variable, meaning the variable names are case sensitive. So I can define two variables by uppercase and lowercase, and they would be considered two separate variables. So for now, let's not confuse this, and let me use another variable too. Any queries up till now? Now let's understand what these parameters and variables are about. Let's start with parameter. And let's take the wait activity itself. Now, let's ignore the settings and other aspects. For now, for today, our focus is on understanding parameters, variables, and the dependencies. And some of the activities, use cases you can understand, but we'll get in detail on this other aspects like activity states, etc. eventually. Now, if you see under settings, I can when I click on this, I can edit it manually to a static value, or can you see something called as add dynamic content? So imagine that I want to have different wait time based on certain circumstances rather than having a static hard-coded value. So meaning I want it to be dynamic. So in that case, what I can do is you can click on add dynamic content. Now, this add dynamic content would allow you multiple aspects: system variable, trigger parameter, functions, variables, etc. For now, let's not indulge in the other aspects, and let's just focus on parameters and variables today. So in this case, I want, depending on the parameter value that is being passed, wait for that much amount of time only. So I'll select this parameter, the type that I had kept as integer. So within the activities, you can either hard code your value or you can make it dynamic for some metadata driven framework. Now, remember that not all of the activities supports, not all the properties within the activity supports dynamic aspect. We'll take a look eventually on that. So now what I did is, I had declared a parameter 1 of type integer and I had provided its default value as 3. And rather than waiting for some hard-coded static time, what I did is I made it dynamic. So now let's execute this pipeline. Now, once I create a pipeline, how to execute it? First, under Home tab, you can click on, first you need to save the pipeline. Once you save the pipeline, then you click on the run activity, the run option here. So what this would do is, it would go and execute the pipeline. So now, can you see when I executed the run, it provided me with, before executing the pipeline, it is providing me an option to update the parameter value here. So as I stated, parameter values can be modified prior to the pipeline execution, but cannot be modified during the pipeline execution. So now what I'll do is, rather than waiting for 3 seconds in the current execution, I want it to wait for only 1 second. So now I updated the corresponding value. Imagine that if I do not want to update, it would take the default value that is present here and I click OK and it would execute for 3 seconds. But in my current execution, I do not want to wait it for 3 seconds. I want it to wait for only 1 second. Hence, I updated it from 3 to 1, from the default value to the one that I want. And then I click on OK. So what is happening is, now the pipeline is getting executed and the wait activity would now wait for only 1 second. Now the pipeline got executed. Now ignore this duration. This duration 3 seconds is not equivalent to the parameter 3 seconds. Okay. Let me change this default parameters to 10 and let me re-execute this to avoid any confusion, correct? So now my default parameter value is 10. Now, rather I updated the pipeline logic, correct? Meaning I updated the parameter value here. So first aspect is I can click on save and then run, or I can click on run. When I click on run, it would, in case if my pipeline is not saved, it would ask me to save and run. So one way is you click on save and then click on run, or in case if you click on run, it would ask you to save initially and then execute it, in case if the pipeline is not already saved. So now it is first saving the changes and then it is going to this execution mode. So now I want to make it wait for 1 second. I'll execute this. So the pipeline got succeeded. Can you see the duration? The duration is not equivalent to that. Basically, the duration is, it also need to contain some metadata, etc. The wait activity actually took only 1 second to wait. But this duration 2 seconds is for the overall status to be reflected back, etc. So you can ignore this duration here. But can you see the input is now 1 second? Because even though the default value was 10, at the runtime, I provided the parameter of 1. So now let me update the parameter. So rather than 10, let me provide it with some other value. Now can you see? Since my parameter is of type integer and I am passing some string value, it is stating that it's an invalid value. And hence it is not allowing me to execute further. So what I can do is, I have to provide a proper value. So in this case, let me wait for 5 seconds now and let me execute this. Since I had not modified any changes in the pipeline, it directly got executed, meaning the run. There was no save and run option. So now if I go and check the input, it would show me 5 seconds because that was the parameter, that value that I had provided. So any queries on the concept of parameter? So parameter is something that I can provide during the pipeline execution, cannot be updated once the pipeline is under execution. Any queries?
Yeah, Nandan. So parameter we use here in data factory, and we also use in notebook. So is that both same
Have we started
uses?
notebook, Ramesh, as of now?
No, no, no.
So let's hold
Okay,
on to that.
sorry. Okay,
Okay, but do make a note and we'll discuss it eventually.
sure, sure.
But yes, the concept of parameter, since this parameter to the notebook question is not that different because the concept parameter remains the same throughout. Correct? Parameter is like a value that you can provide prior to the execution but cannot be modified during the execution. This definition is not only specific to the parameters within the data pipelines, it's the same for parameters in SQL stored procedures. It is same for parameters within the notebook as well. It's a generic concept that Microsoft uses within its ecosystem.
Okay.
So to answer to your question, yes, parameter is similar in notebook as well. Clear?
Yeah.
Any other on parameters? Yes or no?
No question.
Okay. So now coming to the variables or any query on the wait activity. Wait activity is a predictable activity. Correct? That is it. You just need to provide how much time do you want to wait. So any query on the wait activity?
No.
So now let's take a look with respect to some of the other activity like set variable activity. Variable is something that can be modified or set during the pipeline execution so that you can use it for other aspects in your data flow control flow. So as I said, variables can be set or modified during a pipeline run. So for that, in order to or modify a variable, there is something called as a set variable activity. Now the set variable activity is to set specific values to the variables during certain execution aspect. So in this case, I have two variables, variable 1 and variable 2. Correct? So now let me take variable 2 as for my use case. Meaning I want to set the current time stamp for this variable. I want to preserve the current timestamp. Okay, let me take an example. So now, once I wait for, let's say, the parameter value, or let's say, rather than this, now let me hard code it. Correct? So let's say I want to wait for 5 seconds. Once I wait for 5 seconds, I want to capture the timestamp as of that time in a variable. So first is under pipeline variable, I want to select which variable I want to assign the value to. Since I want to assign a timestamp, which is a string value, I use variable 2. And I can have a hard value, let's say 1, 2, 3, or I can have a dynamic value. Since I want to capture the timestamp after this, meaning I want it to be dynamic. So there are certain functions which we'll cover in detail eventually. But let me take a function called UTC now. UTC now here as it represent the current timestamp as a string. So I'll take this and I'll assign this value to this variable. Now let's state that after assigning this, I want to wait for additional 2 minutes, 2 seconds. Or I can make it dynamic based on whatever value the user passes during the pipeline execution. I want to wait it for that much amount of time. And then I want to override this variable, that is var2. Again, I'll use a set variable activity. Since I want it to be sequential, that once done, then move to this, then move to this. And up till now, since I've only discussed success dependent, only taking success as the scenario here. So now what I want to do is I want to update the variable to again with the latest value. So again, I'll use the UTC now to assign the time. Since I have made multiple changes, I can save it and run, or I can click on it would save and run. Now, say wait for 1 second and click on OK. So now what is happening is the parameter value is what I passed before the pipeline execution. Post that I cannot modify it. But can you see? Now it's waiting for some time before it went ahead. Now let's check the values. Now let me arrange it by the timestamp itself, meaning first the wait one got executed, which was a hard-coded value of seconds. Then I associated this set variable, meaning I associated this variable var2 with this value, which is its output as well. That is 2025, 12th of June and certain time, which is UTC time. Then there was a wait of 1 second because I had parameterized it, and in the parameter I had provided once as the value. And then finally it took latest time. If you check, it is 3:19:50:78 and earlier it was 3:19:47. So now in case if I reference, now my question is, I used variable 2 and variable 2. In case if in the future aspect, when I say future, if I use, okay, now let me define another variable. Let's say I define var x as string only. Now under activities, I use set variable and now I associate var x with the value var2. So you can associate a variable with a parameter value or any other variable value, but you cannot self-reference the same variable. Meaning the expression contains self-referencing variable. A variable cannot reference itself in the expression. In certain languages like PowerShell, Python, you can self-call the variable. Meaning, imagine that if I declare, let's say, variable x, correct? Variable x, I can associate and I can define a default value equal to 0. Then variable x equal to variable x plus 1, and I can run this in a loop wherein I can associate a variable, meaning I can self-reference a variable within its own expression. That's possible in some of the languages like PowerShell, etc. But in Azure Data Factory or the data pipelines in Microsoft Fabric, you cannot self-reference a variable. It would throw an error stating that the expression contains self-referencing variable. So in that case, I hope this aspect is clear. So now what I'll be doing is I'll be assigning variable X the variable 2 value. Now tell me, in case if I execute the pipeline now, so up till now we saw within homepage, I can save and then click on run. I can run and it would save and then run, or there is a run tab as well, wherein in run tab, I can click on run and it would save and run as well. Now let me wait for 10 seconds and click OK. Now what is happening is, initially I'm associating the variable 2 with the value of the timestamp post this execution. Then I'm waiting for 10 seconds now because I passed 10 seconds as the value in the parameter. And then I'm assigning the variable 2 value again. And then I'm assigning variable X the value that is captured in variable 2. Now let's check the logs. So now initially there was a wait activity. Then the set variable had this value of 17.07. Now again I am waiting and then it got updated to 29.02. Now I'm assigning this variable, that is variable 2, to variable X. Now my question is, which value of variable 2 would be assigned to variable X? Would it be the value that was present here, or would it be the value that was present here? That is present here. Which value of variable 2 would be associated with variable X now?
Variable 2, because you assigned.
Ramesh, both. This is also, you mean this value or this value? Both are variable 2 only, correct? If you see in this activity also I'm assigning variable 2, and in
Okay.
this activity also I'm assigning variable 2 only.
Okay.
So which instance or value of the instance of variable 2 would be assigned to var X? Would it be value that was captured here, or would it be value that was captured here, is my question.
The latest one. This one.
Latest.
The latest
This one, yeah. It will be override again, always.
Are you all sure?
Yes, in the case variable, I'm sure.
Yes.
Correct. So basically, since this is a sequential flow, and since I am using the same variable eventually in the set variable activity, the previous value gets overridden. And that was a clear example. You need not check that here as well, correct? Because I had initially assigned the variable to XYZ value, meaning the original value was XYZ. When I used the set variable here, it means it overwrote the original value and assigned it the latest value here. And then if I'm using set variable activity on the same variable again, it means I'm overriding the original value with the new value. So this old value got overwritten with this. And now since this is the latest instance, or let's say that even if I have multiple activities in between, like wait, etc., it would still capture the same value at the end, because the variable value is now fixed throughout its journey until and unless I override it again. So now in case if I check the output of set variable 3, it would be 29.02, which is equivalent to the variable 2, etc. Now, is it because it's the same value because I instantly called this? No. Even if I have multiple activities in between, let me add additional wait activities in between. Now, let me add this as parallel. so that you all understand. So now, once set variable is done, I am parallelly executing two wait timers. But I'll come to the dependency concept eventually. And then this. So now my question is, now let me execute this. So now my question is, would there be any difference between variable 2 and variable x after this execution? Yes or no?
Then can you repeat your question? I'm not getting.
My question is, here I'm assigning variable 2, correct, with the latest UTC now. Post that, I'm waiting for some time across by wait activities, and then I'm assigning variable x value of variable 2. So now my question is, in this scenario, would the values of variable x and variable 2 be same now? Or it would be different because I've added wait activities in between?
It would be same. It doesn't matter, I believe.
No, I
It
think
is not what you believe. Correct that it won't be same. It would be same because the variable value can be updated, assigned or modified during a pipeline run, and it remains constant throughout the run until and unless it is modified again.
Correct. Yes.
Here, even if I add 100 x number of more activities here, until and unless I use a set variable activity again and override variable 2, the value of variable 2 would remain constant throughout its future journey till the time it is updated again. Hence, even if I add n number of activities in between and assign variable x with the variable 2 value, it would remain the same. It is 54.54. Okay, sorry, it's wait activities, hence no output. 54.54. So a variable is the one that can be modified during a pipeline run, whereas parameter can be modified before pipeline execution only. And varies between parameters and variables. Yes or no? Now, in layman terminology, I can state that parameter is the one that allows a user to manipulate the pipeline run. So in case if any of your execution needs user input, needs to run based on certain user input scenario, that is when you would use a parameter. Can I state that in simple terminology? So that the user can pass certain value that would change the flow of the execution. That's when you use parameter. Yes or no?
Yes.
Whereas variables are something that we need to manipulate or to have certain aspects during pipeline execution. And we'll understand that once we take an end-to-end use case, the actual use case of variables. But for now, is the difference between parameter and variables crystal clear to you all?
Yes.
yes, Nandan.
And I hope now the wait activity and the set variable activities are also clear to you all. Set variable activity is used to set the value of the variable. It can be static, meaning a hard-coded value, or it can be a dynamic value based on the dynamic expressions that we saw. And dynamic expression provides multiple aspects which we'll cover eventually. But for now, is the basic understanding of set variable clear? What does this pipeline return value signify, etc.? We'll cover in detail eventually. But at least the basic understanding of that activity, is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's understand the concept of dependencies in detail now. the other dependencies. So now let me use set variable activity again. And in the set variable activity, I want to update the variable one value. Here, let me add, it's integer, correct? Let me add parameter one, which is of type integer. Then I want to ensure that once this activity is completed, then once this activity is successful, then move over to, then wait for some time. Hence, I would use the tick mark, that is on success, and drag it to the next activity. This signifies that only on success of the set variable activity proceed to the wait activity. Similar to what we had seen earlier, correct? Now let me run this. Now this is getting executed. Now since the set variable activity was a success, it proceeded to the next activity, and that next activity was also success. Hence, I am seeing this green tick at the top of the activity. Now let me tweak it a bit. Now let me update this set variable to some other value. Now here I'm getting a warning. Expression of type string does not match the field value. Because variable one is of type integer, but I am assigning it with a value of type string because UTC now output is of type string. Hence, it is giving me a warning. Now let me execute this pipeline. So now what is happening is I am trying to assign a string value to an integer variable. It is not possible, correct? In any language, it is not possible to assign a string value to an integer. It would definitely fail. That's why it failed. Can you see a failure symbol here? X, cross meaning failure. Since this activity failed, and I had stated that execute this activity only on success, this activity never got executed. Any queries up till now?
No, no, no.
But now imagine that rather than on success, if I make it on completion means I do not care whether this is a success or failure. As long as this activity is successful, as long as this activity is completed. Completed meaning wait till it provides me with completion status, whether that completion is a success or a failure, I do not care. Irrespective of that, I want to proceed ahead. So for that, you have something called as on completion. On completion means irrespective of whether it's a success or a failure, it would proceed ahead. So now, even if this would fail, this won't be executed till the time it fails or succeeds. So now since it failed, meaning it got completed, hence it proceeded ahead because I have kept it on completion. Any queries on the concept of on completion? So now rather than a string value, let me make it a static value of integer. Now, if you see, even if this was a failure, it had proceeded ahead, and even if this is a success, it is proceeding ahead, because as long as this activity is getting executed and completed, it would proceed ahead, irrespective of whether it is a success or failure. That is what we mean by on completion. Any queries on success or on completion? Yes or no?
No, no.
Now, let me make it on failure. Now, I hope now you all would be able to understand that only on failure of this activity that you should proceed ahead. In this case, I still have the variable as value 1. So this would be a successful. So in this scenario, would this activity be executed if I execute this pipeline?
Yes.
No.
It's failed, right?
No, because it's on failure, no?
What is the value assigned at this moment? String or integer?
It's integer that I'm assigning.
Then it won't.
It will not go because it will
Failure,
not
yeah.
fail.
Correct. So in this scenario, this activity got executed successfully. But since it's on failure that it should proceed ahead, and since this was a success, it never proceeded ahead. Clear? Now let me change the variable to some string value. Now in case of static hardcode value, it is not intelligent enough to give an warning because it does not know. Whereas in case of dynamic content, it pre-processes what the output type would be depending on the internal functions. Hence, at that time we received a warning. But in case of hard-coded value, since it does not know until you actually execute it, it won't understand. And hence there are no warnings that are being provided. So now, since I'm trying to assign a string value into an integer data type, it would fail. Since it would fail, it would proceed ahead. And this got executed. So any queries on the concept of on failure?
No.
Now, the final dependency is on skip. Can someone tell me, based on the scenarios that we had seen up till now, what can on skip indicate? Or what is the on skip dependency about?
Skip in the case of failure also.
No.
Even though previous activity fail or success, you can proceed ahead like that.
No, not exactly. So now let's take this scenario, correct? Let me make this as a successful scenario, and I've kept on failure. On failure, wait for some time, correct? But then I want to state that I want to send an email notification to someone that there was no failure. Or, okay, let me take another route. Okay, let me execute this first. So in this case, this would be a success because I have reassigned it with an integer value itself. And since this would be a success, this won't be executed. This activity won't be executed, meaning this activity would be skipped. Correct? In case if I want to execute something, once this activity is skipped, I can use on skip activity. Meaning, what I can do is I can send an email notification that for now, let's ignore email notification because I have to configure that, correct? For now, let's state that, let me use set variable only. And for that, let me assign variable X with the corresponding variable value with some value, let's say pipeline ID, and I'll come to that pipeline ID concept later. So now imagine that if this activity is not executed, if this activity is skipped, I want to set a variable or I want to do some activity. So at that time, I'll use this on skip aspect. So now what would happen is, rather than the pipeline stopping here itself, pipeline this activity got executed, it would bypass or skip this activity and proceed ahead. So at any point of the time, if you want to bypass or skip certain activities, but still proceed ahead in a sequential manner itself, based on certain scenarios, that's when you will use on skip activity. So now in case if I execute this, you would see that this activity is successful. It skipped this activity. Can you see there is no symbol at the top, meaning this activity was skipped, or you can even check in the output. Can you see wait one anywhere? No. It skipped this activity and it proceeded ahead. This is on skip dependency. So any queries?
So it is actually skipping the next activity after that.
No, it is in case if this activity has been skipped, then proceed to the next activity.
Correct, correct.
Okay, let me take an example here, correct? Now let me fail this. Now this activity would fail. Since this activity would fail, this activity would get executed because it is on failure that I proceed to wait one activity. Now this is getting executed. Since this got executed, meaning it was not skipped, this activity is now ignored or skipped, because this activity would be executed only if this activity has been skipped. Clear? Any queries? Yes or no?
No.
Okay. So are there any queries on the dependence, 4 types of dependencies? Because now some of the concepts would get complicated. So yes or no, should we proceed ahead?
Yes, Nandan.
Yes.
Okay. So now let me remove this. Now remember, not every time all the activities are sequential only, correct? I might have parallel executions, etc. So now let's consider that I am assigning 2 variables parallelly, meaning when I execute this pipeline, both of them are independent because there is no dependency among them. Those are getting executed parallelly now. Now what I want to do is, I want to wait. Now up till now what we had seen is I was adding dependencies between only, there was dependency between only one-on-one activity dependency, but that is not the case. You can add a dependency on an activity to n number of activities, meaning you can see, correct? Now what I have done is I have added a dependency of set with this activity on this activity, and I've added a dependency of this activity on this activity. Similarly, I can add n number of activities and n number of dependencies, meaning I can again add a dependency of this activity on this activity. So in this scenario, can someone state me when would wait one be executed? Or how would wait one be executed? Let me reframe my question. So basically, what happens is, in case if there are multiple dependencies on an activity with different activities, it takes an and precedence, meaning this activity would be executed if and only if set variable one activity is success and set variable two activity is success and wait two activity is a success. So this activity would only be executed if and only if all three activities are success, meaning it takes an and precedence, logical and. Now I hope most of you are familiar with the concept of logical and or. It's the logical graph. 1 1 is true, 1 0 is false, 0 1 is false, meaning true false false, false true false, false false true false, false false false, true true is true. So only when all conditions are met, then and then only wait one would be executed. So in this case, if I run this pipeline, this activity would be executed if and only if this is a success, this is a success, and this is a success, because I have added success scenario. Now the pipeline execution failed. Let me check the reason for the same. Okay. Okay. Sorry. The pipeline, sorry, it was correct itself. You all can see, correct? In set variable of variable one, the integer, I have associated ABC, a string value, and hence I can see the corresponding failure message that the variable var1 of type integer cannot be initialized or updated with type string. Can you see these two were success, but still wait1 didn't get executed. Why wait1 didn't get executed? Because this activity was a failure, and I'm stating that wait1 should be executed if and only if this activity is a success and this activity is a success and this activity is a success. Since one of the condition was false, hence this activity didn't get executed. So if you are adding dependency on an activity across multiple activities, it takes an and precedence, meaning all the conditions of the activities should be met before proceeding to this activity. So now let me update it to value 1 and let me execute this pipeline again. So now in this scenario, this would be successful, thereby wait1 would be executed. Since all three were successful, hence wait1 got executed. Now, on failure, if I add ABC, if I run this that wait1 should be executed if only if this activity is a failure and this activity is a success and this activity is a success. Since this was a failure, this activity got executed. Any queries up till now? Yes or no?
No, clear.
But so up till now we saw that you can add dependencies on an activity via multiple activities. But up till now we have only seen that I have only added 1:1 dependency between this. Meaning I have only added on fail, on success, etc. Does it mean that I cannot add multiple dependencies of the same activity within another activity? Meaning, as of now, there is only on failure between these two activities. But I have 4 types of dependencies, correct? Can I add more than one dependency between activities? Yes or no?
Sorry, come again.
Sorry,
Can you repeat the question again, please?
the question is,
Uh-huh.
can I add more than one dependency between two activities? As of now, there is only one dependency, correct? On failure. But we have 4 different types of dependencies, correct? So can I add more than one dependency between these two activities?
No.
No.
I think
No.
Unfortunately, the answer to that is yes. Or rather than that, I'll say fortunately the answer to that is yes, and your answers were wrong. You can add multiple dependencies between the same activity. Meaning, I can state that but there are some limitations as to how many, on what combination of dependencies you all can add. Correct? Let me, here, what this means is, I can state that, okay, now let me run this and check whether this would be a failure, meaning assuming that if, as per you all, you cannot add multiple dependencies between two activities. Correct? Let me execute this. It is getting executed properly. So you can add multiple dependencies between two activities. But in that case, what happens is, what I had said, dependencies across different activities are considered as an AND scenario. Meaning, wait 2 should be successful and set variable 2 should be successful. Now, multiple dependencies between similar activities are considered as OR. Meaning, wait 1 would be assuming these two activities are not there. Just focus on these two as of now. So wait 1 would be executed if set variable activity is failed or set variable activity is skipped. So multiple dependencies between similar activities are considered as OR. Multiple dependencies across different activities are considered considering different set of activities are considered as AND. So in this scenario, this framework, wait 1 would be executed if and only if wait 2 is success and set variable 2 is success and a bracket. Set variable 1 is either failed or set variable is skipped. Now, in case if I make it a success, set variable as a success, success meaning it is neither skip nor failure. So this condition failed. This OR condition failed. Hence, since this condition failed, the AND condition failed. Hence, wait activity didn't get executed. Clear? So, dependencies across different activities on single activity is considered as AND. So this activity should meet its condition. This and this activity should meet its condition, and this activity should meet its condition. Multiple dependencies between two activities are considered as OR. So this activity should be skipped, or this activity should be a failure. Then and then only proceed ahead. So clear on the concept of dependencies up till now?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
let me add on success and on failure. Would this be successful?
Yes.
So in this
Or
scenario,
close
in this,
Yes.
sorry,
it will successful, I believe,
Yeah,
because
it
the
is
OR clause,
successful
right?
because or it follows OR condition.
so if you see, I have had two dependencies. I have stated that even if it is a success or if it is a failure, proceed ahead. Was there a need for me to use these two combination? I could have directly used on completion itself, correct? Because what I'm stating here, if this activity is a success or this activity is a failure, proceed ahead. That would have been done by a single on completion aspect as well, correct? Agree?
Yes.
And is there a, go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe not all, maybe suspended or something might be another condition wherein.
No, it's if I use these two, or if I use a single on completion, it's one and the same. There is no difference between these two. So the combination of these two is equivalent to on completion itself.
Okay.
I'll take two additional minutes before we close today's session. Does that mean I can only have two dependencies? No,
No.
I can have multiple dependencies. There is no limitation on only one or two. Correct? So now I can, even if I execute this, this would get executed successfully. So this states that if this activity is skipped, or this activity is a success, or this activity is a failure, proceed ahead. Now, let me add on completion as well, all four, and execute this. So if you see, it failed to run the pipeline. I'm not seeing any output. It is because of, let's check the error message. The template is invalid. The status values for action must be found duplicate values succeeded and failed. If you see, this template that I have done is invalid. Does this mean that maximum 3 is the limitation? You cannot have 4? Is it because that I've added all 4? It failed? Meaning the template became invalid because of which the pipeline didn't get executed?
Maybe it's not supported all.
Definitely all 4 are not supported. But that is not the base reason behind this failure. Correct? Now let me remove 3. Let me remove the on skip. So now there are 3, correct? So in this, if I execute, this would still be a failure. Meaning this is still not a valid template. It would state that the template is invalid. According to you all, you said that 4 is not the limitation, correct? But that is not the actual base reason behind that template invalid. If you see, again the template is invalid. Let's wait. Again the template is invalid. because now let me remove on completion and keep it on success and on completion. Isn't on success and on completion similar itself? Meaning on completion is the path once the activity is completed, and on success is the path also when the activity is completed but a successful state. So it is stating that the status value for action must be unique, it is duplicated. Meaning on completion also I'm stating that it's like a success itself, correct? On success or on success. So it's like a duplicate value. So you cannot use the combination of on completion with on success or on failure. You can use on skip, combination and on completion, but you cannot use the combination of on success and completion or on failure and completion because it's a duplicate aspect. I hope you all understood, correct? Or is there any confusion on this aspect?
On success on completion will be duplicate, right? And
And on failure and on completion would be duplicate because on completion would execute irrespective of a success or failure. It is just waiting for the completion status. Similarly, on failure is also on completion itself, correct? That you would get a failure. So on completion and on success or on completion and on failure is a duplicate value because irrespective of that, it would proceed. Hence, it was stating that it has an invalid template. Hence, if you use this combination, there would be a failure of the template. Hence, 4 combination can never be used because underlying on completion on success or on completion on failure cannot be used together. Am I clear?
Yes, crystal clear.
And on completion is equivalent to on success or on failure together. So rather than using 2 flow arrows, I can use a simple on completion itself. This is dependencies. Any queries before we close today's session? So I'll take it as a no and we can stop today's session.